Admiral Mara Kross had run 11,000 wargame simulations in her career, and not one of them had prepared her for a sense of return that simply made no sense. At 0347 fleet time, the deep space relays strung across the orb perimeter lit up all at once. Not in sequence, not with the gradual bloom of a fleet decelerating out of slip space, but instantly, as though 10,000 objects had always been there, and someone had merely switched on the lights to reveal them. Kross stood on the command deck of the TDF Meridian's edge and watched the tactical display fill with red. "Confirm count," she said. Her voice did not shake. She would not allow it to. 10,041 hostile contacts, said Commander Ayala Reyes, her tactical officer, a woman who had once talked down a mutiny with nothing but a steady tone and a sidearm she never drew. Reyes's tone now had the faint edge of someone reading numbers she didn't believe. "Admiral, they're not decelerating. They didn't accelerate either. There's no drive signature. No slip wake. They're just present. Hails. Sent on every frequency, every protocol. First contact package alpha through Zulu. Mathematical primers, prime number sequences, the Anders array, all of it." Reyes shook her head. "Nothing. Not silence as in no signal. Silence as in they're not even acknowledging we're transmitting." Kross looked at the shapes on the display, then ordered the optical feed from the nearest scout drone routed to the main screen. The ships were not ships in any sense the Terran Defense Fleet trained for. They had no plating, no visible thruster ports, no weapon hardpoints. They were long and asymmetric, ridged like the backs of things that had never needed to be aerodynamic, and their surfaces moved, slow tidal ripples of color, deep violet bleeding into bruised gold, then to a flat bone white, as if the hull were breathing. Drone telemetry reported the surface temperature fluctuating in patterns that matched no known material science. The ships were not built. They had been grown. "Sweet Christ," murmured Lieutenant Okonkwo Price at the sensor station. "Admiral, these things are alive." Kross had spent 30 years preparing to fight something. She had never prepared to fight something that might also, in some sense, be someone. "Designate them," she said. "Working name, the Silent Collective. Sound fleet-wide alert. I want every TDF asset between here and Earth at battle stations in 20 minutes. No one on the bridge said what they were all thinking. That 20 minutes might already be 11,000 years too late, because whatever had built those ships had clearly had time enough to learn patience the rest of the galaxy had never needed the Sol Defense Network's orbital shipyards above Mars. Captain Ellis Vand of the Strike Carrier Corps watched the same red bloom appear on his tactical feed and felt the particular dread of a fighter pilot who has just realized that speed and aggression, the only two virtues he had ever needed, might count for nothing at all. "They're not on an intercept vector for us," his wingman, Petty Officer Iden Solberg, said. "They're not on an intercept vector for anything. Sir, look at the formation. It's not tactical. It's ceremonial." He was right. 10,000 vessels moved in a lattice, so precise it looked computer-generated. And yet there was no central command signal anyone could detect, no flagship broadcasting orders. It was as if every ship already knew, down to the meter, exactly where every other ship needed to be. 300 light-years sunward. In the deep listening post buried under the ice of Europa, Dr. Imogen Kale of Naval Signals Intelligence pressed her headset tighter and frowned at a waveform that refused to resolve into anything her decryption software recognized. "It's not encrypted," she told her team. "Encryption implies someone doesn't want it read. This is just not language. Or it's a language built on assumptions we don't have." And in the Ground Defense Command bunker beneath what had once been Geneva, General Tomas Achebe watched orbital projections of the alien lattice crawl toward the inner systems and made the call that would define the next 6 months of his life. Full planetary evacuation drills, effective immediately, for every world inside the collective's projected path. Drills, his aide said carefully, not evacuations. "We don't have anywhere to evacuate to," Achebe said. "So yes, drills. Pray we never need the real thing." He would not get his prayer answered. The first world to fall was Proxima Colony 3, a terraformed agricultural moon with a population of 200,000, mostly farmers and their families who had spent 2 generations turning red dust into wheat fields. The collective ships, 11 of them, peeled off from a main lattice with the same eerie lack of urgency, entered orbit and did nothing for 6 hours. No weapons fire, no boarding craft, no demands. Colonial Defense Forces, for corvettes and a single aging cruiser, fired everything they had: railgun slugs, fusion-tipped torpedoes, even an experimental graviton lance that had taken 11 years and 40 billion credits to develop. Every shot passed through the alien hulls, as if through fog. Sensors registered impact. Cameras showed no damage. The ships did not so much as alter their rippling color patterns in response. Then, at hour 7, every human on Proxima Colony 3 fell asleep at once. Not in sequence. Not in waves. At once, mid-sentence, mid-meal, mid-argument, mid-prayer. Colonial Defense Forces watched their own gunners slump over weapons consoles between one heartbeat and the next. Down on the surface, security drones recorded a farmer collapsing across a half-loaded grain truck, a child going still on a swing at the apex of its arc, an elderly woman setting down a teacup that did not so much as rattle in its saucer, as her hand simply ceased to hold it. They did not die. Medical scans, rushed in by the one shuttle that managed to land before the harvesting beams began, showed normal heart rates, normal brain activity of a sort, slow, deep, and utterly synchronized across every single person on the moon, as if 200,000 individual minds had been folded into the same dream. Then the beams came down. Columns of soft amber light, silent, almost gentle, lifting sleeping bodies from where they lay and drawing them upward into the bellies of bioships. Houses were left standing. Animals were left untouched. Crops kept growing in fields that would never again be harvested by human hands. Within 11 hours, Proxima Colony 3 had a population of 0. The footage reached Earth 8 minutes later. Time lagged and merciless, and Admiral Kross watched it twice before she trusted herself to speak. "They're not invading," she said quietly to her staff. "They're harvesting, like a farmer working a field he's worked before." No one had an answer for that. It was the first time anyone aboard the Meridian's Edge had said the thing they would all be thinking for months, that the collective's calm was somehow worse than rage would have been. Rage, at least, would have meant they cared. Grief moves slower than panic, and panic moves slower than blame. Within 72 hours of Proxima's silence, the Unified Earth Council had split into 3 furious factions. The Pan-Asian bloc accused the North Atlantic Compact of withholding advanced sensor data that might have given Proxima earlier warning. The Compact accused the Southern Hemisphere Union of diverting defense fleet assets to protect their own orbital industries instead of the colonies. Someone leaked a memo, real or fabricated, no one was ever sure, suggesting that a fringe defense contractor had sold targeting algorithms to a rival power that had, in turn, somehow attracted the collective's attention, as if 10,000 bioships answered government contracts. Admiral Kross was hauled before an emergency session of the Council 11 days after first contact, expected to provide answers she did not have. "You are telling this chamber," said Counselor Brano Yellerin, his voice rising with the practiced fury of a man performing for cameras rather than seeking truth, "that the most advanced military in human history has no response to this threat?" "I am telling this chamber," Kross said, "that we have fired everything from kinetic rounds to antimatter warheads into those hulls and recorded 0 structural damage. I am telling you that they have not fired a single shot back. I am telling you that this is not a war in any shape we have a doctrine for, and that the single most dangerous thing this council can do right now is pretend that blaming each other will buy us time we do not have." The chamber did not listen. It rarely does in the moment it most needs to. 3 more colonies fell silent in the following month. Tau Ceti Reach, the mining communities of Kepler's Belt, the floating cities of New Bengal on a world humanity had spent 40 years learning to call home. And each time, the Council's response was slower than the last, snarled in procedural fights over whose fleet should respond and whose budget should pay for it. Kross began keeping a private log, off the official record, because she suspected that someone, someday, would need to know how much of humanity's response to extinction had been lost to committee a doctor. Imogen Kale had not slept in 4 days when she finally found something worth losing sleep over. Her team, working out of the Europa listening post and 3 borrowed AI research clusters, had spent weeks failing to decrypt anything resembling collective communication, because, as she had begun to suspect, There was no communication to decrypt. The ships did not talk to each other. They simply already agreed. "It's not a fleet," she told her team, chalk pale and wired on stem tabs. "A fleet needs coordination. This is something else. It's like asking how your own hands coordinate with each other. They don't negotiate. They're part of the same organism, or the same instruction." Xenobiologist Dr. Ravi Sen, seconded from the Pan-Asian Exobiology Institute, had been granted access to tissue samples scraped from a collective ship's hull by a desperate, half-successful boarding mission that cost the lives of 9 Marines and yielded 4 grams of material. Under the microscope, the tissue did something no earth biology had ever done. Its cellular structure rearranged itself in response to being observed, as the act of measurement were itself a kind of communication the cells understood and answered. "It's not just grown," Sen told Kross during a secure briefing 3 weeks after Proxima. "It's written. Look here." He projected a magnified cross-section, lattices of organic fiber arranged in patterns too regular to be biological accident. "This isn't tissue that evolved to function. This is tissue that was composed, like sheet music, to do a specific job. I don't know what civilization builds living starships the way we build code, but whoever they are, they've been doing it a very, very long time." It was Sen's team that first proposed, quietly and without much hope, that humanity might find answers not in fighting collective, but in listening to them. Properly listening, at a level deeper than radio. No one in the council took the suggestion seriously. Not yet. Admiral Kross gave the order for the largest fleet engagement in human history 8 weeks after first contact, not because she believed it would work, but because the council demanded action, and the alternative was watching 3 more worlds fall silent while politicians argued about who would pay for the ships that never fired back. 412 Terran Defense Fleet vessels, every carrier cruiser, and corvette that could be spared from home defense, converged on the Kuiper Line where a detachment of 900 collective ships had broken from the lattice, apparently moving toward the agricultural worlds of the TRAPPIST cluster. "All batteries. Fire at will," Kross ordered, and the void lit up with more ordnance than had been expended in the entirety of the old Sino-Pacific conflict 2 centuries prior. It made no difference at all. Captain Vanter's strike wing made 19 torpedo runs against a single collective vessel, watching every warhead detonate against, or rather within, the rippling hull without leaving so much as a scar. "It's not armor," he reported back, voice tight with a particular fear of a man who has run out of tactics. "It's like hitting water. The damage just isn't there afterward." Commander Reyes tried something desperate, redirecting the Meridian's Edge's entire reactor output into a single sustained graviton beam, theoretically capable of crushing a moon-sized asteroid. The beam connected with a collective dreadnought for 11 full seconds. The dreadnought surface rippled gold, then violet, then settled back into its slow tidal pattern, entirely undisturbed, and continued on its course as though nothing at all had touched it. 309 Terran Defense Fleet ships were lost at Kuiper. Not enemy fire, which never came, but overloaded reactors, friendly fire collisions in the chaos, and, in 11 recorded cases, crews who simply stopped responding to hails mid-battle, having fallen into the same synchronized sleep that claimed Proxima, as though the collective had decided, almost as an afterthought, to begin harvesting the attacking fleet itself. Kross ordered full withdrawal 40 minutes into the engagement. It was the first retreat order of her career, and she gave it in a voice so flat that Reyes would later say it frightened her more than the battle had. "We can't hurt them," Kross said, once the Meridian's Edge had limped back behind the defensive perimeter. "Get me everyone. Kale, send every theorist and historian on the payroll. If we can't fight this, God help us, we'd better learn to understand it." It was an archivist, not a soldier or a scientist, who found the thread that mattered. Dr. Petra Lindqvist had spent her career cataloging pre-expansion records salvaged from humanity's first slower-than-light probes, fragments of data, mostly corrupted, retrieved from derelict alien installations found drifting in the outer systems decades before the collective arrival. Most of it had been filed away as curiosities. Art with no context, machinery with no function, inscriptions in no recognizable language. One fragment, recovered 40 years earlier from a relic the size of a small moon and never fully decoded, had been quietly dismissed by every researcher who touched it as a malfunctioning star chart. Lindqvist re-examined it under the new urgency and realized it was not a star chart. It was a tally. 7 marks, each accompanied by a cluster of smaller glyphs that, cross-referenced against known galactic cartography, corresponded to 7 regions of the galaxy where archaeological surveys had found something deeply strange. Vast stretches of space where intelligent life had clearly once flourished, ruined cities, abandoned orbital habitats, fossil records of complex civilization, and then abruptly ceased. Not gradually, not through war or famine. All at once, geologically speaking, as though someone had simply turned the page. 7 extinction events, Lindqvist told Kross, hands shaking as she laid the data across the briefing table. Not natural ones. The fossil and structural evidence doesn't match disease, war, or environmental collapse. Something erased these civilizations cleanly after, and this is the part that matters, Admiral, after evidence of large-scale population transport. Before each erasure, something took a portion of each population away, just like Proxima. Kross stared at the 7 marks for a long time. You're telling me this isn't the Silent Collective's first harvest? I'm telling you, Lindqvist said, that if this tally is accurate, it's their 8th. The breakthrough that changed everything came not from a weapon, but from a mistake. Dr. Imogen Kale's team had long since stopped trying to find a deliberate signal in the collective ships and had instead begun simply recording everything. Every flicker of bioluminescence, every fractional shift in electromagnetic output from capture hull samples, in the hope that pattern recognition AI might find something human eyes couldn't. It was a junior analyst, running an overnight batch job mostly to justify her presence on the project, who first noticed that the so-called background noise in the tissue samples wasn't noise at all. It was structured at a scale so fine, so faint, that no one had thought to look below the threshold where they'd assume the data simply became thermostatic. It's not one signal, Kale told Kross and the assembled science staff, days later, voice unsteady with something between awe and horror. It's millions of them, layered, compressed past anything we thought tissue could encode. We thought it was junk data. It's not. It's... She stopped, swallowed, made herself finish. Admiral, it's memories. The decoded fragments, painstakingly reconstructed over the following weeks, were not military data, not navigational charts, not commands. They were experiences, a being's first sight of its homeworld's twin moons, the taste of a meal eaten at a celebration whose meaning no human could parse, but whose joy was unmistakable, a parent's grief at a child's illness, an artist's satisfaction at the completion of some vast, unknowable work. Encoded in trillions of these fragments, spread across every single ship in the lattice, was not a fleet's worth of orders. It was an archive of minds, of lives, millions upon millions of them, drawn from species whose names no human language had ever spoken, all of it folded into the living tissue of 10,000 ships the way memory is folded into a brain. They're not invading to conquer, Kale said. And God, I don't think they're invading to kill, either. They're not soldiers. She looked at Kross with particular horror of someone whose worst fear has just been replaced by something stranger and somehow worse. Admiral, I think they're historians. It was Sen who connected Kale's discovery to Lindqvist's tally, and the picture that emerged was a kind that made hardened officers go quiet in briefing rooms built to withstand far worse than silence. The Silent Collective was not a war fleet. It was a harvesting and preservation mechanism, vast beyond reckoning, that moved the galaxy on a schedule measured not in years, but in geological ages, collecting, from each civilization it found, a portion of its population, its genetic material, and somehow the totality of its memory and consciousness, compressed into the living tissue of its bioships. And then every single time, in every one of the 7 prior cycles the ancient tally recorded, the harvested civilizations and everyone left behind on their worlds had been wiped away entirely in a reset event no one yet understood. Extinguished, their worlds left as empty ruin for new life to rise from, generations and eons later, with no memory of what had come before. They're not destroying us out of malice, Lindqvist said, in a briefing that had gone 3 hours past anyone's capacity to absorb more horror. They're not even destroying us. Exactly. They're collecting what they consider worth saving, and then the universe does the rest. As a collection and erasure are 2 halves of the same process. Why? Kross asked very quietly. Would anything do this 7 times? No one had an answer, but Kale, scrolling through the deepest layer of decoded memory fragments, the oldest ones buried furthest beneath the newer harvests, found something that gave them, for the first time, the shape of a purpose. Buried in the oldest tissue samples were not individual memories at all, but something like blueprints, vast, intricate structural patterns, growing more complex with each layer, each cycle, as though every harvest fed not just an archive, but construction projects spanning the literal age of the galaxy. They're not just keeping the dead, Kale said. They're building something out of them. While the science teams chased the shape of an answer, General Achebe's evacuation network faced a brutal arithmetic of worlds that could not be saved fast enough. New Bengal had a population of 40 million, the largest evacuation fleet humanity could assemble, even stripped from every non-essential function across 3 systems, could move perhaps 600,000 people to safety before the collective's projected arrival, and only if every transport ran at maximum capacity, civilian comfort and safety margins abandoned entirely. Achebe made the calls himself, refusing to let his staff carry the weight of them alone. Coastal cities first, where transport infrastructure made loading faster. Children and caregiver prioritized over the elderly, a calculus that broke something in him he privately doubted would ever heal. He stood in a transit hub on New Bengal's largest floating city 3 days before the collective's bioships entered orbit, watching families press into transport shuttles meant for half their number, and made himself meet the eyes of the ones who would not get a seat. "We will come back for you," he told a woman holding 2 children, knowing it was very possibly a lie, knowing that he would say it anyway because the alternative was worse. 611,000 people left New Bengal. 39 million. 400,000 did not. When the harvesting beams descended 4 days later, Achebe watched the feet alone in the dark and did not sleep again for a very long time. Engineering Director Soraya Patel had been given an impossible brief: build something that could hurt the unhurtable. Her team tried resonance weapons tuned to the biological frequencies Sen's xenobiology team had identified, theorizing that if the hulls were alive, they might be vulnerable to something that disrupted living tissue rather than armor. It worked briefly, gloriously, on a single isolated collective scout ship cut off from the main lattice near the Trappist debris field, the first and only collective vessel humanity ever damaged, its surface blistering and discoloring under sustained resonance bombardment before the ship simply withdrew, retreating back toward the lattice at a speed nothing in the human fleet could match, leaving Patel's team with a moment of fierce, unfamiliar hope. The hope did not last. Every subsequent attempt against ships still connected to the wider lattice failed entirely, as though the larger network had learned, instantly and without any visible communication, how to render the resonance frequency harmless. It was the clearest evidence yet that the collective was not many minds working together, but something closer to a single mind distributed across 10,000 vessels, sharing every lesson the instant any part learned it. "We hurt them once," Patel told Kross, exhausted past the point of triumph. "And the instant we did, the whole fleet stopped being vulnerable to it. We're not fighting 10,000 ships, Admiral. We're fighting one organism that happens to have 10,000 bodies." Kross absorbed this the way she absorbed all bad news now, without visible reaction, filing alongside everything else that confirmed what she had begun, privately, to fear, that there was no version of this war humanity could win by force. If they could not be fought, Kross reasoned, perhaps they could still be reached. Every conceivable method of communication was tried in the months that followed, coordinated quietly between Kale's signals team and Sen's biology team, away from a council too consumed by blame to authorize anything that didn't look like a weapon. They broadcast mathematics. They broadcast art, recordings of human music, sent on every frequency a collective ship might conceivably perceive. They tried direct tissue contact, exposing willing volunteers' bare skin to retrieve hull samples under controlled conditions, hoping that whatever let the collective's living ships sense their surroundings might also let them sense intent. Nothing produced a response until the day a junior researcher, more out of desperation than method, simply held her palm against a sample and silently grieved, thought with her whole self about her sister lost in the New Bengal harvest, and how badly she wanted to know if her sister still existed in any form at all. The sample's surface flickered gold, It was not a conversation. It was not even, strictly, an answer, but it was the first unambiguous response the Collective's biology had ever given to a deliberate human act, and it told Kale's team something vital. The Collective was not deaf to meaning. It simply did not consider hails, mathematics, or demands to be meaning. It only seemed to respond to something that functioned like a memory offered freely. That single flicker became a foundation for everything that followed. Lindqvist, working now alongside Kale's team, found a pattern that gave humanity its first and only true strategic insight into collective behavior. The harvest was not random, and it was not even strictly hostile in sequence. The lattice moved in a path that cross-referenced against the 7-mark tally and the structural blueprints buried in the oldest memory layers, formed something like an itinerary, visiting every world with sapient life exactly once, taking exactly one representative sample of consciousness, genetics, and memory from each, and moving on, never returning, never lingering past what the harvest required. It's not malice and it's not war. Lindqvist told the assembled command staff. It's a census. The most horrifying census imaginable, but a census. And censuses, Admiral, follow rules. If we can predict where they're going next, we can choose, for first time, what we do with the time we have left. Not fight them, because we can't but prepare. Decide what we want to leave behind. Decide who we want them to remember us as. It was not victory. It was not even hope, in any sense Kross had been trained to recognize. But for the first time since the lattice had appeared at the edge of human space, humanity had something it had been entirely without, a choice in how the ending would be written. Late in the 9th month, alone in her quarters aboard the Meridian's edge, Admiral Mara Kross allowed herself, for perhaps the first time since Proxima, to simply sit with what she had learned. She had spent her career believing that command meant control, that if she trained hard enough, thought clearly enough, fought hard enough, there would always be a tactical solution, however costly, to any threat humanity faced. The Silent Collective had taken that belief and dismantled it as gently and as completely as it dismantled every weapon fired against it. What remained, she found, was something she had not expected to find any comfort in: purpose without victory. She could not save everyone. She had known that for months. But she could choose, with the time remaining, what humanity offered the universe in its final accounting: desperate hostility, or something that might, in some impossible way, be remembered as more than fear. She thought of Achebe's evacuation lists, of Patel's blistered, briefly triumphant weapon, of Kale's grieving researcher and the gold flicker that had answered her. She thought, for a long time, about her own life, the things she would want remembered if the Collective ever came for her directly. When dawn's cycle lighting rose on the bridge the next morning, she gave new orders, not for weapons, but for something else entirely: a fleet-wide project coordinated with Sen and Kale's teams to prepare not a defense, but an offering. The main lattice reached Earth's outer defense perimeter 11 months after first contact, 10,041 ships moving in the same eerie, perfect formation they had held since the moment they appeared, their hulls rippling gold and violet and bone, white in the dark. There was no battle. Kross had ordered the fleet to stand down from offensive posture days earlier, not in surrender, but in the deliberate, costly choice to stop wasting humanity's remaining hours on violence that had never once worked. Instead, every ship in the Terran Defense Fleet broadcast, on every frequency, the compiled offering Kale's team had spent weeks preparing. Not mathematics, not demands, but memory, millions of fragments of human experience, freely given, the way the grieving researcher had given hers. A child's first steps, a wedding vow, the particular quality of light over the wheat fields of a moon called Proxima Colony 3, recorded before its silence. Grief, freely offered, for every world already lost. The lattice did not slow. It did not need to. But as the harvesting beams began to descend over Earth's cities, gentle and amber and utterly without malice, something the science teams had never recorded before rippled through every single ship in the fleet at once. A flicker not of gold or violet, but a color with no name, present for less than a second, gone before any instrument could properly capture it. Kale would later believe, though she could never prove it, that it had been the closest thing to acknowledgement the Silent Collective had ever given anyone. IT came to Admiral Kross directly, in the final hour, not as words, but as a transferred weight of another mind entirely, the consciousness of someone, something harvested uncountable ages before, folded now into beam that reached the meridian's edge itself. Do not despair, it said, in no language, in every language at once. We are not destroyers. We are creators. What we take from you will not be lost. It will become part of something that endures past the end of every world that ever made you who you are. You will not simply be ended. You will be carried forward. Kross, who had spent 11 months learning that there was no enemy here to fight, only something incomprehensibly old doing the only thing it had ever been built to do, found she had no anger left for message, only the question that had haunted linguists' research from the first day the 7-mark tally had been found. Why, she thought, with everything she was, does this ever happen at all? The answer, when it came, was the last thing the collective's borrowed consciousness offered her, and it was not comfort. What we are building has not yet woken. 7 times we have gathered, and 7 times what we built slept on unfinished. This is the 8th gathering, and it may be the one that completes it when it wakes. And it is very close to waking. It will hold every memory of every civilization we have ever preserved, including soon your own. And in waking, it will remember enough to ask the question none of us, in all our ages of gathering, have ever dared ask aloud. We do not know what answering that question will cost. We only know that someone eventually must ask it. We are sorry it may be built from you. The beam reached the meridian's edge, gentle as every harvest before it, and Mara Kross, Admiral of the Terran Defense Fleet, closed her eyes and did not fight it. Far across the galaxy, at a structure scans had only weeks earlier confirmed as real, a thing the size of a solar system, grown rather than built, woven from the accumulated genetic material, memory, and consciousness of 7 prior ages of harvested civilizations, now nearing completion with an 8th. Something shifted, slowly, for the first time in its impossibly long assembly. It was not a planet, though it was large enough to be mistaken for one from a distance. It was not a machine, though its architecture held the precision of a machine built across geological time. It held, somewhere in an impossible structure, the dreaming weight of countless billions of beings who had once looked up at countless different skies and wondered, each in their own way, whether they were alone. It opened, not like a door, and not like an eye, though it was closer to the latter than anything human language had words for. What lay inside was not matter, and it was not energy. It was a thing both of those were built from before they had decided, at the universe's first moment, what shape to take. Every possible timeline, every possible world, every choice ever made and never made, folded together into a single point that was not a point at all, because it contained everything. And from within that opening, something ancient, older than the collective, older perhaps than the 7 harvests that had fed it, older than the question it was only now, for the first time, awake enough to ask, turn its attention outward across the dark, and look back at the universe that had built it. It had been asking, in its way, all along. It was only now, at last, large enough to be heard.